Jesus Trejo is a fast-rising name in the comedy scene, having appeared on all the late-night TV shows. But aside from stand-up at 36, Trejo also has another job. He is a caregiver for his parents, who are in their 70s.
The biggest challenge for me as a caregiver definitely has been, trying to juggle everything. If you're a parent, you know this story. It's like, you got to do this. Sometimes, you put things on hold because, your kid's sick or your life doesn't allow you to put wiggle room in your schedule, but you do the best you can. I learned to communicate and let people know that, hey, I'm a caregiver. Like, I'm sorry I canceled this thing, or I'm sorry I can't go to this thing, or I'm sorry I'm late. I do have some responsibilities at home, and I think 9 times out of 10, people are understanding, but it is a big, big challenge.
Now, Nolan, I know this is something that you know all too well, having kids of your own and having to be that caregiver in that role. Do you have aging clients who have loved ones as caregivers, or adult children that take care of their parents? And if so, how does this change your retirement plan?
It really can change the retirement plan quite a bit. I guess my own personal experience, I would say. I think of my grandfather, and I would use the word, he's a man's man, So I think of Grandpa, and he was, born and raised and did all the right things. And my grandmother had a stroke, and he was the primary caregiver all the way up until, they both passed away. And what I would say about it is, looking from the outside in as a younger kid at the time in my, 20s, I would say, I think that time frame really wore a lot on my grandfather. I would say it kind of aged him being a caregiver. And, if we flash forward, to me being in the business 29 years later, dealing and working with a lot of clients who are the adult caregivers, one thing I would say is things are a little bit different today. And then if we flash forward and we think about the future, I also think about, what are the steps that we as caregivers can learn about, how being a caregiver can change my retirement plans. So a big takeaway, I think, from this segment is that being a caregiver, the importance of planning ahead. The adult children really need to make sure that they have a plan in place now versus wait. So if you're somebody who's listening and you've had to be that adult caregiver, as better than I do, or as good as I do, what it takes and the different impacts that it can have on it. But it can really have a significant impact on your retirement plan, both financially and emotionally. When we look at it, some of the financial impact is you could have reduced income. Caregivers' responsibilities, it's sometimes going to require you to reduce your working hours, take a leave of absence resulting in less income. You could have increased expenses. So you could have increased medical costs. You could have the expense of the home modifications, hiring professional assistants. Financially, it can impact your savings. It can be a strain as a caregiver. It's going to limit your ability to contribute to your retirement savings account. It could force you to dip into your existing savings. You could have a career interruption. So a lot of times I'll hear my clients who are retired, and we'll talk them through developing a plan. And they say, well, my kids have always told me, they'll take care of this. Well, if their kids are in their 40s or 50s, like, I am, the challenge is I get up and I go to work every day. I have a career, and it would be an interruption, although obviously I could do that, but it would, again, financially impact my family. So we're very two working adult families today, and those career interruptions can, have an impact. It can have an impact not only on the number of working hours that you can have, it can have a strain on your working relationship with your employer, and at the end of the day, it could also have a strain on, what you could be entitled to down the road for Social Security benefits, because if you are a caregiver for several years, that could lead to lower Social Security benefits. It could ultimately impact the timing of your retirement. So, when you look at this, it ultimately could result in you having to postpone your retirement due to some of those financial constraints that we had talked about earlier on. So when you look at long-term care planning, it becomes even that much more important. One of the things I think that's also important for an adult caregiver to understand is there's still things that you can do. We had an event earlier this year where we hosted a free community movie night, and we had 140 people that came out and showed the movie Top Gun. And I remember, meeting this gentleman at the event, and he had shared with me that his dad was in a nursing home, and I had asked him about, what is being done right now to protect dad's assets from a nursing home spin down, and his answer to me was, nothing. Every month we just write out these $10,000 checks and we pay the bill. Well, then, what I did is I made an introduction to an elder care attorney in town, because even in a crisis situation, there's still legal strategies that are available to help people protect their assets. So they don't have to have their whole life savings wiped out. But at the end of the day, the government wants you to continue, and the nursing home wants you to continue to write those checks, for $10,000 until you're financially exhausted. But knowing that as the adult caregiver, you're typically in what's called a non-crisis situation. So in a non-crisis situation, there is a good need for, looking at what are the steps that you can take. So as you get older, how are you going to protect your assets, from a long-term care spin down? That could be things like looking at long-term care insurance. That could be things like looking at adding annuities with long-term care riders onto them. That could be looking at things like life insurance with, accelerated benefits while you're alive. That could be looking at other ways to leverage your existing assets and or, set aside a chunk of money. But when you're in non-crisis mode, and again, as you're an adult caregiver, there's going to be a lot more choices that are going to be available to you versus waiting till down the road. Like, again, in the situation where the caregiver came up and told me about his dad who was already in the nursing home, that becomes a crisis mode. I think about the emotional toll that it gives as a caregiver. The stress and burnout, again, I think about my grandfather in that own situation. I really looked at my grandfather. Again, I call him a man's man. But that time frame that he was a caregiver for several years, it really was an emotional, physical demanding on him. The stress and burden of that situation associated with being the caregiver, I really think that impacted his overall well-being and potential impact, on his life as well. If we think about, Social Security and pension implications, I talked about it before, but it can impact things like what you're doing. If you're caring for a spouse, the spousal benefits could be impacted. You might want to consider different strategies based upon what you think spousal benefits will be for Social Security. If you have a pension, it could impact the decisions of what you're going to do for a pension option, whether it's single life, whether it's period certain. A lot of situations I've had where people that are coming in, we've been taking life options, but also getting a period certain. That could be a way to protect the family as well on pension options when you're thinking about how could it impact us as a caregiver in the situation. And the last topic is on estate planning. So, there's inheritance considerations, when you're going through this as a caregiver, making sure that things are taken care of. I know when my mom got sick, I was only a caregiver for a short period of time because of how bad pancreatic cancer is. But I know in that short amount of time, it gave me an opportunity to talk to mom about what some of her estate planning wishes were. And, if we needed to make any short last minute changes to the estate plans, we were able to get those things taken care of. So how you take care of all of this is, again, it goes into coming and developing a plan. We can look at long-term care, we can look at legal estate issues, and we can help give you some advice and support in the situation. So if you're an adult caregiver, or I think you might be an adult caregiver, or you've just become an adult caregiver, I'd say let's have a conversation. Let's talk about, the strategies to protect your assets from long-term care.
Again, the number to reach out is 419-794-3030. As people are living longer and longer, that is a great thing. But with that longevity comes the increased probability of needing some form of assistance, whether that is, long-term care facility, whether that is you being the caregiver. But knowing the ramifications of it starts with being proactive, having that conversation. Again, America's Retirement Headquarters can help and create that plan, which includes that. 419-794-3030, or go to the website, arhq.com.